Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's November 19th. Today, we celebrate the co founder of the American Society of Landscape Architects and a man who maximized his small space garden about 130 years before the rest of us. We'll learn about the man who came to America to work with Andrew Jackson Downing, and then they both ended up dying by drowning 43 years apart from each other. We remember the poet laureate who wrote, "If I had a flower every time I thought of you," and the Catholic priest and poet who loved to garden and wrote elegantly of the seasons. We grow that garden library with a memoir featuring a gardener who was working in naval intelligence in Washington on the day the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I'll talk about using place card holders with your houseplants, and then we'll wrap things up with the tale of two botanical brothers at Gettysburg. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Gardenista just shared a post called 10 Garden Ideas to Steal from Germany. Germany's verdant practices include rooftop gardens, wildflowers and gardens, the incredible work of the florist Ursula Wegner that you have to go and check out, and much more. Great post from Gardenista, as per usual. If you're partial to German gardens, you can go ahead and check that out in the Facebook group for the show. And then Michigan State University had a wonderful post, very timely. It was called How to Care for and Reflower Your Christmas Cactus. And I love what they shared in this post because they broke it down into a simple formula for success with your Christmas cactus. So if you've struggled to grow a Christmas cactus or keep it alive in the past, here's what you're supposed to do. Have organic, humus-rich soil, a cute little pot, since they like to be pot-bound, so don't give them too much room. They want to feel snug. Regular watering. Just because it's a cactus doesn't mean that we should withhold water and completely ignore them. Christmas cactus are not those kinds of houseplants. Cool temperatures. I was talking to my mom today, and she was telling me how my great-great-grandmother had the most beautiful Christmas cactus, and of course, she kept it out on the porch where it was nice and cool. And then finally, to get it to bloom, it needs 14 hours of darkness per day. And if you live in Minnesota, you can pretty much achieve that with the help of Mother Nature. No other assistance required. And there you go. How to care for and reflower your Christmas cactus. Thank you, Michigan State Extension. And then finally, Atlas Obscura shared a very touching piece. It was called A Year Gardening the Grave of a Stranger. It was a fascinating post about the kind folks at Woodland Cemetery in Philadelphia. These people beautify grave sites with gardening. And what I thought was especially poignant were the cradle graves. These are graves that have a tombstone, and then in front of the tombstone is this small cradle. It almost looks like a little bathtub, and they were designed to be little miniature gardens on top of the grave. And so gardeners are now adopting individual grave sites and then planting beautiful little gardens, herb gardens, wildflowers, you name it. It's just such a great idea. And I love that these cradle graves are being brought back to life in this way. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated posts and articles for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it in the listener community for the show. It's a free Facebook group. The next time you're in Facebook, just search for the Daily Gardener Community, request to join, and I'll admit you into the group. It's just that simple. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the landscape architect Nathan Franklin Barrett, who was born on this day in 1845. Instead of joining his father's successful dye company, Barrett went his own way. After serving in the Civil War, Barrett learned about plants by working in his brother's nursery. In 1866, the field of landscape architecture was brand new, just a baby, and there was no prescribed coursework or preparation. Like many landscape architects, Barrett secured work as a town planner. He laid out the town of Dolgeville, New York, as well as Pullman, Illinois, which is now located in Chicago. The town of Pullman was named for George Pullman, and he was one of Barrett's closest friends. The planning Barrett carried out in Pullman became one of his proudest achievements. Pullman was the country's first planned industrial town. And gardeners will enjoy hearing about Barrett's personal home garden in New Rochelle, New York. It was set on a half an acre. Barrett designed his garden in an attempt to show others how to maximize a small space, just that half an acre. Listen to the various areas and gardens that he managed to install in his modest yard. Be prepared. I'm warning you, it's quite the list. Here we go. An old-fashioned colonial garden, Japanese, Roman, and Moorish gardens, and English topiary. His cellar opened to the garden level, and it was connected with this long vista. So as you'd come out of the cellar, you'd see this beautiful perspective. Barrett also created a Normandy peasant's sitting room that could look out onto the garden, a German peasant's kitchen, and a Pompeian court. I kid you not, that's what it says. There was a little brook at the rear of the property, which added picturesque effects, and the garden was replete with, quote, pleasant little nooks and surprises at every turn. I believe it. And one newspaper shared a description of Barrett's wild planting tendencies. It said this: the poppy and the ground ivy and creeping Charlie and myrtle mingle together. The aster and the goldenrod feel at home. Ferns and mosses are used liberally, and while abandon is aimed at, there is method in the madness, and the wild garden and the formal play their part, each enhancing the charm of the other. And Nathan Franklin Barrett co-founded the American Society of Landscape Architects and served as its president in 1903. Barrett worked all over the country, and when he retired, he had practiced landscape architecture for 50 years. And by the time Barrett died in 1919, he had been the oldest living landscape architect in the United States. And before I forget, there was one other story that I wanted to share with you about Barrett. In 1902, Barrett went to Los Angeles. He was supposed to give a speech on landscape architecture. Sadly, he caught a cold and lost his voice, so his speech was read for him. And it turned out to be a stroke of luck because his entire speech was then shared in the newspaper. Here's my favorite little excerpt. It's where Barrett addresses the spaces where living areas connected with shopping areas and how good landscaping should mask the sides of ugly buildings. The line between the store and the residence is a battle line. As the business increases, the residence is forced back. The only remedy for this insight is to make the transition as inoffensive as possible. And let us ask the object of taking the valuable space in the city for lawns. Is it not to relieve the buildings? I think so. Therefore, we should plant large trees to take away the mass of masonry which must necessarily exist in both house, sidewalk, and street. Bull Street in Savannah, Georgia, has always appealed to me, where the walls are covered with ivy, and the old parts of Norfolk, Virginia, where the ivy makes a coping 2 to 3 feet thick and hangs down over the wall, is excellent. And today is the anniversary of the death of the landscape architect Calvert Vaux, who died on this day in 1895. Vaux was born in England, but he came to the United States at the age of 24 to work on landscape projects with Andrew Jackson Downing. Together, they planned the grounds around the Capitol and the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. After Downing's untimely death, Vaux named his second son Downing in honor of his partner and friend. Vaux went on to work with many talented people during his career, including George Radford. When Calvert Vaux came up with the idea for a public competition to design Central Park, he teamed up with Frederick Law Olmsted, and together they created a plan they called Greensward. And when they worked on Central Park, Vaux first coined the term landscape architect to describe their profession. And it was Calvert Vaux who said that his goal for Central Park was to translate democratic ideas into trees and dirt. Since Olmsted and Vaux worked so well together, after Central Park, they designed Prospect Park in Brooklyn, South Park in Chicago, and the New York Reservation at Niagara Falls. By 1895, at the age of 70, Vaux was living with his son in Brooklyn. He had a morning ritual of taking a walk, often going to visit Prospect Park. But on this day in 1895, the weather was foggy, and Vaux decided to walk the pier along Gravesend Bay. 2 days later, after his kids had reported him missing, newspapers shared this description: missing since Tuesday, Calvert Vaux, aged 70 years, 4 feet 10 inches, medium build, gray hair and full beard, ruddy complexion, wore blue overcoat with velvet collar, blue trousers, dark mixed undercoat, no vest, black derby hat, wears gold-rimmed glasses, shirt has name on it. The following day, Vaux's body was found in Gravesend Bay. Like his dear friend Downing, Vaux had drowned. At the end of November, the Statesville Record and Landmark out of Statesville, North Carolina, ran an anonymous tribute to Vaux that read in part, Calvert Vaux was in his line of one of the most famous men in the world. He created Central Park, and people who have traveled all over the world say that no park in any foreign city is so beautiful. But the Brooklyn folks say that their own Prospect Park is handsomer. Yet that, too, was created by Calvert Vaux. It was he who soothed nature's rough places and touched up and brightened her attractive features. In Prospect Park, however, nature left little for man to do. But Central Park is almost wholly artificial, and its beautiful vistas of hill and dale, of lake and wood, are largely the work of Mr. Vaux. Probably a statue of him will be erected in Central Park. Certainly his name ought to be perpetuated in the most enduring of stone. And to my knowledge, no such monument has ever been created. In unearthed words, on this day in 1850, the British poet Alfred Lord Tennyson became the Poet Laureate. And he once wrote, "If I had a flower for every time I thought of you, I could walk in my garden forever." And today is the anniversary of the death of the American poet and Catholic priest John Bannister Tabb, who wrote these two poems about autumn. The first one is called Indian Summer. 'Tis said in death upon the face of age a momentary trace of infancy's returning grace forestalls decay. And here in autumn's dusky rain, a birth of blossoms seems again to flush the woodland's fading train with dreams of May. And this next poem is called Autumn Gold. Earth in the house, in the goldenrod, a bloom in the field. O blossom, how from the lifeless clod, when the fires are out and the ashes cold, doth a vein that miners know not yield such a wealth of gold. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Adventures of a Gardener by Peter Smithers. Sir Peter Smithers was a British politician, a diplomat, and an award-winning gardener. He was also a spy for Britain during World War II, and he is said to be the person that inspired the character of James Bond. His obituary stated that flowers were important to him. He said, "I regard gardening and planting as the other half of life, a counterpoint to the rough and tumble of politics." Smithers learned to love the natural world from his nanny. When Smithers was in his 50s and retired from his work, he was finally able to focus full-time on horticulture. Smithers loved rhododendrons, magnolias, tree peonies, lilies, and wisteria, and he developed a garden that didn't require a ton of work, kind of along the lines of Ruth Stout. And Smithers said, "The garden is planted so as to reduce labor to the absolute minimum as the owner grows older." Today's book was the brainchild of the Royal Horticultural Society, who asked Smithers to write his gardening memoirs. Thanks to Smithers' travels, he had observed gardens in Mexico, Central America, and Switzerland. And Smithers followed certain principles to help ground him when it came to gardening. And his first principle was, "It shall be a source of pleasure to the owner and his friends, not a burden and anxiety." This book is part autobiography and part garden book. Smithers shares stories from his incredible career, like the time he was working in naval intelligence in Washington on the day that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And he's as comfortable speaking about that as he is in explaining the behavior of wasps in the flower garden. This book came out in 1996. It's considered somewhat rare, so you'll see some high-priced copies available online. But you can get a used copy and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for as low as $13. Here's today's garden chore. Use place card holders to help you remember the names of your houseplants. If names like Schefflera or Hoya keep slipping your mind, hop on the labeling bandwagon and use place card holders to label your houseplants. I used to practice saying the names of my plants as I watered them. When they finally rolled off the tongue, I moved on. And now I use the labels just because I think they're pretty. But every now and then I get a new houseplant that I need to learn the name of, and my little place card holders come in very handy for just that occasion. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the anniversary of the death of the botanist Thomas Meehan, who died on this day in 1901. Meehan was born in England to a gardener and his wife, and he was raised on the Isle of Wight. He trained at Kew and then immigrated to Philadelphia. Although Meehan ultimately became known as the Dean of American Horticulture, there was a charming little story that took place when Meehan was in his 40s, and Drexel University shared it in 2018. When a curatorial assistant at the botany department at Drexel named Alana Benamy was digitizing plant images, she came across an image of milkweed, which is pretty common, but what made her take a double take was the date and location of the plant specimen. The plant was labeled Battlefield of Gettysburg, August 20th, 1863. The battle in Gettysburg had occurred during the first 3 weeks of July, so the specimen had been gathered about 7 weeks after the battle, and about 5 weeks after Frederick Law Olmsted had walked the field. Alana asked, "Can you imagine why on earth would someone be out plant collecting there?" Well, as it turns out, the reason made perfect sense, and it involved Thomas Meehan. He was the collector. At the time of the Civil War, Meehan had worked for Andrew Eastwick, who was the owner of Bartram's Garden in Philadelphia. Afterward, Meehan opened up his own nursery in Germantown. In 1853, Thomas's younger brother Joseph had come to the United States from England. The younger Meehan brother was working in the greenhouses for his brother when he enlisted to fight in the Civil War. As the Battle of Gettysburg began, the younger Meehan was taken prisoner, but with the defeat of the army, he was given battlefield parole on July 4th. Historians now speculate that Thomas's brother Joseph might still have been at Gettysburg, or Thomas might have gone out with him on a botanizing trip there. In either case, 33 years later, Joseph would write a beautiful account of the landscape around Gettysburg in an article for a gardening magazine called Battlefield Flowers, Floral Treasures of Gettysburg. Apparently, both brothers, who had made their homes in the city of brotherly love, had inherited their father's love of plants. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.